doing just some of the ins and outs, and Kyle was just talking about and answering a lot of questions you guys had about game and scenarios, situations, approaches. So tonight we're just flipping around a little bit. He's going to kind of clean up some things from the first session. Then we're going to talk a little bit about character and perspective as coaches, and I'm sure there'll just be plenty of opportunities to Q&A along the way as well. But so I'll turn things over to Kyle, and we'll start it off.
Yeah. So the last time we left, I know there's some new faces, but my goal was I wanted you to leave with as many questions as possible, because I'm convinced that the more questions you're asking yourself, the better coach you become. The more committed you get to positions, the more stagnant you become. So, in our 2 weeks apart, was there anything that you were like, I need to know his opinion on this? Was there anything that popped up that you were curious about on any aspects? That's what I'd like to do first, just clean up all that stuff.
I got an email from one of the coaches that wasn't here but watched the videos on YouTube, and he just said, when is it the best time? Like, how often do you go infield in? When should you utilize that approach with defense, especially at some of the younger ages?
Yeah, I think I made the comment last time that I tend to judge coaches on how well their kids run the bases, because it's the one thing that's never instinctual. That how your kids run the bases is really defines you as a coach, because so many hitting coaches, so many pitching coaches, I sort of defer that to specialists. But the other thing that I sort of gauge coaches on is how they manipulate their defense. And I think the infield in strategy is so overused. And I value outs. Maybe I value outs more than most coaches. But every time you bring the infield in, I have no idea what the percentages are. I mean, they're probably out there at the major league level. No one's running percentages on youth baseball. But my instinct is that when you bring that infield in, you really open up the chance for big innings. So first of all, the only time you would ever consider bringing the infield in is if you were down by any amount, if you were up one or if you were tied. When I see people up by more than one run and they bring the infield in, and immediately I'm like, that just goes against all general principles. So, if there's one thing I could communicate, that would be an absolute given, is if you're up by more than one run, you can't bring the infield in, because essentially what you're saying is, I have to win by at least one run. Like wait a second now. Like the goal is just to win. It's not to win by a certain amount. So as long as you have a 2-run cushion, you can't bring your infield in. It doesn't make any sense to bring the infield in if you have a 2-run cushion. So many times I see people bring the infield in with more than a 1-run lead, and I'm like, just can't do it. Just can't do it. That goes against basic baseball principles. So that's the first thing that popped into my mind, is I see it happen with more than a 1-run lead, and immediately you can't do it. It just never happens at higher level baseball.
Yeah. You still do that even when you're tied or even down a run early in the game?
You said tied or down.
Yeah.
Tied or down is subjective. You can do what you want if you're tied
Even
or
early
down.
in the game?
Well, I'm not a big fan of early in the game. But I don't judge you if you do it. I mean, if you do it, I'm thinking to myself, man, you're running that risk.
Right.
But it's not like I go like, he doesn't even know baseball. Like,
Right.
if you do that, I might question your strategy. If you bring the infield in by up more than one, I almost dismiss you as a baseball coach. I mean, that might be harsh. You can't do it. You just can't do it. And then stand in front of a group of boys or parents and say that was sound strategy. It just falls flat in its face. So I don't think about these things when they're asked, but that is one thing that I see that immediately sets me back. Like, just think a little bit.
I think we get wrapped up in Saturday play, though, too. You know what I mean? When you talk about most tiebreakers or how many runs you've given up. So I know you're probably going to talk a little bit about that today, but Saturday baseball, when like 1 or 2 runs can mean the difference between a morning bye and an 8 o'clock game in 35-degree weather. Like, I think that's why some people probably make mistakes, because they're thinking on that level.
They do,
right?
and you're right, and I realize that tournament baseball sort of takes these rules and says, hey, all the convention that we know to be true, we're going to dismiss it for tournament baseball. And you run into bigger questions than just whether you bring the infield in. It's whether we run up 15 to mercy rule someone because it's tournament baseball. Right? I mean, those are all the things that run through your mind. And I know how I would answer that, but you know, I'm not gonna tell you. We are gonna talk about character and perspective, and I think that there will be some good discussions there. But yeah, tournament baseball in that respect, when it really narrows your focus and makes you aware of all these external influences that are outside the actual game, then yeah, we tend to do silly things, and that would be an example of a silly thing. Bringing your infield in up by more than one, and running up by 15. Those are all silly things.
On that same kind of strategy,
Yeah.
bunting, I think once that you get to a 60-90 field,
Mhm.
I think it's totally underused in tournament baseball.
Yeah.
I think everybody's looking for home runs,
Right.
and the big hit, and I think there's opportunities to really open up the offense with bunting.
Yeah.
you're-
So my opinion on that is tournament baseball. You guys are coaching people that are paying to play, and you're traveling some distance, and there's general expense associated with playing. So my first thought is, I never really asked people to bunt unless they were comfortable doing it. In other words, it was a skill set that they could develop as they got older. Okay, so if you were a center fielder, if you were a leadoff guy, if you were some fast guy that could take advantage of his foot speed, we would have a conversation that says you probably need to develop that skill set. You probably should look to bunt on occasion. If you were my 3-hole, 4-hole, 5-hole, literally anyone that enjoyed the act of swinging a bat, I seldom thought about the bunt, just because it was tournament baseball. I mean, just for that simple fact alone, if we're playing in the mid pen and it's a critical game, and yeah, now if we think advancing a runner for an out is the prudent play, then we're gonna bunt. I don't care who you are, it's something you need to do. But you know, that's different. They keep standings. It's a long journey. It's a 2.5-month season. You've got championships awarded at the end. You know, here you got a weekend. You pay for your hotels. You pay for all this stuff. If they don't want to bunt, no, I'm not asking them to bunt. And that's just me. That's one of my philosophies. But some kids should bunt. You know, we had conversations with many kids that says, look, you're not going to be 6'2". You are going to be fast. You're going to be an outfielder that can go a sub-760. Like, you probably need this skill set. You should consider this. So when I tell you, when I suggest the bunt, we always had a suggest bunt. It was never like a you have to bunt. We had a suggest bunt. When I suggest the bunt, it's something you should consider. And we would practice that. I mean, we would always practice it because they enjoyed it. It's a skill set. You know, when my guys would get to their high school team, if they didn't know how to bunt, I would be disappointed. I hadn't done my job. But teaching them how to bunt doesn't imply that we have to bunt. So we would, if you ever saw one of my practices, we would always close with bunting. And because it was fun, the kids liked doing it. We challenged their third baseman, our pitchers, our catchers, and then we called them the rabbits. The rabbits would always bunt. So I didn't ask the middle of the order guys to do it. Usually they were a corner guy, or maybe they were a pitcher, so they were fielding the bunts. But those rabbits were always bunting. They were trained to bunt. We just, you know, I mean, we drive to Diamond Nation. I don't necessarily know if I want you to bunt. So that's just my philosophy. Anything else? So last week was competence, okay? And we are baseball coaches. So if these kids showed up and you didn't know baseball, you'd be disqualified from the word go. I mean, you have to know the game of baseball, and that would be considered the what. Today, we're going to talk about the why. And the what is important, but the why is what begins to separate coaches. The why is what gets people to drive 2 hours to come to one of your practices. The why is why you get people following you and hanging on your word, and then you become a much better coach when you can be consistent with your why. So the what is the foundational piece. You can't coach baseball without knowing baseball. But the why is really what begins to separate us. And I called this week character and perspective. So what I put together, do they have access to that thing?
Yeah, I'll send it to him right now.
Okay, so Doug's going to send I put a diagram together today, and this is what I would call my mental model that I literally just put together today. I think I was working on it for a while, and then because I knew I was going to be talking about it, I was like, all right, I finally better get this thing down. So because technology exists, and because I think you could work off of it better if it's in your phone instead of on a piece of paper, I took a picture of it, sent it to Doug, and I think he's going to send it to you. And that's what we're going to work off of here, just off of this picture.
Yeah, if I have your number, I send it to you.
And then you can distribute it
Yeah,
according
to your assistant coach.
Okay. Let me know if you don't have it, because that's going to be
Getting
working on
on
Does it
to
come with
Rick
3D
and Paul.
glasses?
I'm sorry. You're going to have to expand it. Can you expand it?
Yeah. It's
coming,
Okay,
Jason.
good, thank you. So as you guys are pulling that up, is everyone staring at it right now? Do you have it? Okay. If I asked you, what are your goals as a coach? Like, why do you coach at its most basic level? What is your mission statement? What are you trying to do? Every day you go to a field, like, how do you evaluate whether you were successful or not? And that's a pretty deep question, and one that maybe you haven't thought about. Would anyone care to even suggest that they've thought about it? Like, what would be your mission for coaching? Have you thought about it?
Oh yeah.
What's your mission?
I think it's just bigger than just the game for me. Like I just see it as like the sports in general, opportunities to grow kids and to just challenge them on that level of the competition part, but also about the character part that you're talking to, and seeing that there's a lot bigger purpose for why we're here. And
Yeah.
have the ability to do these things.
So, if you haven't thought about it, it's probably a good idea to spend some time thinking about why you do what you do, because why you do what you do sort of insulates you for behaviors that might pop up in the heat of a game. Okay, so if you know why you do what you do, sometimes that can protect you from certain situations. So here's what I have, and I need to explain what it is. And this, I think this mental model gets confused all across the country. And then as I relate to it, of course, please ask questions, because I think this is really helpful for coaches. So I truly believe that the best coaches have what I call a telescopic lens, where they can really narrow down and they can really pull back. And coaches that don't quite meet that need, they tend to be either what I call macro coaches with a big view, or micro coaches with this real small, narrow view. Your best coaches have the ability to adapt and go up and down, like a telescope. So what I want to do first is I want to talk about the macro position. I want to talk about the position when you're coaching the little people, okay, which we've all coached. And even if your folks have moved beyond that, eventually you might get back into it and you might coach young kids again. So I believe at that the highest level, this big picture macro level, I believe that the major primary purpose is to instill a lifelong love of the sport. At its most basic level, if we get kids dying to come to practice, sprinting out of their car, running to the field, telling mom and dad they can't wait till the next practice, you are an unqualified success. I mean, that is priority one. When you coach young kids, if they can be excited about tonight's practice, you are absolutely an incredible coach. End of discussion. Okay? So what happens far too often is macro level coaches with a big perspective, they read information, they learn about the game of baseball, and then as they learn about the game of baseball, they want to teach that to their kids. And every time they learn about the game of baseball, slowly that lens starts to get closer and closer and closer. And before you know it, they have this micro view of the sport. And then that's what I call overcoaching 101. when you take young kids and then you try to be too precise